Baku Airport, May 19, 1978. On Perron, the Tu-154B passenger plane is preparing to proceed to its final destination Leningrad, performing flight 6709.134 people, 126 passengers and 8 crew members are boarding the aircraft, and a crew from the 107 Baku flight detachment is preparing to control Tupolev. The aircraft commander is Anatoly Nikolaevich Fedorov. For him, this flight is his first as a commander. The co-pilot is Eduard Alexeyevich Demonov, navigator Valery Ashatovich Petrov, a flight engineer Vadim Georgievich Potapov, and flight engineer Anatoly Mikhailovich Chernyakov instructs, and 300 ordises work in the cabin of the aircraft. At 10:30 a.m. Moscow time, the dispatcher gives our crew permission to take off, and the Tu-154 plane breaks away from the runway off Baku Airport and sets course for Leningrad. The first half of the journey passes without incident, and our plane is already flying over the Kalinin region at an altitude of 9,600 meters. At this time, in the cockpit, the flight engineer, instructor and the co-pilot enthusiastically communicate with each other, and none of the crew notices how the engine speeds are falling. Soon the engines stop altogether, and then the generators are shutting down. The controls of the liner are de-energized. The pilots discover a problem with the generators when the plane tilts to the right and its speed begins to drop. Finally, the commander begins to realize that a catastrophic situation is developing on board. He takes control and begins to fend off the crewmen order to stabilize the plane, and only a minute after the generators were turned off, the crew finds out that the cause of what is happening is a stopped engine. Having established the fact that all 3 generators were turned off in the current situation, the crew does not comply with the requirements of non-flight operation in terms of turning off the switches off the automatic control system. The aircraft turns its nose up, which leads to a rapid loss of instrument speed from 570 to 370 km per hour. This position of the aircraft threatens a rapid loss of speed and crashes. To maintain the speed at 500 km per hour, the pilots deflect the steering wheel away from themselves and begin to descend, and the commander sends a distress signal to the ground and simultaneously tries to start the engine. 169, SOS, SOS, SOS. 169, what happened to you? We have a failure of all engines. We need an urgent landing. 169, the nearest Bezetsk, 65 kilometers away. Will you land? Yes. The crew tries to restart the engines, but all 5 attempts are unsuccessful. The altitude is already 5 kilometers and the pilots attempt launches from the auxiliary power plant, but they fail to do this, since the APU can only be used at an altitude of up to 3 kilometers. The nearest airfield is located in the city of Bezetsk at a distance of 65 kilometers. The commander, realizing that he cannot reach it without engines, decides to land on the terrain. The crew looks at suitable barley potato fields below, and the commander informs the proud guides about the situation so that they prepare the cabin for an emergency landing. The height is 2,000 meters. The crew releases the chassis, but due to lack of pressure in the hydraulic system, the struts are not fixed. At 13:32 Moscow time, without the release of flaps, race 60,709 lands on barley potato fields, 5 kilometers near the village of Maksatikha. Upon landing, the plane crashed into a tree with its right wing and rolled across the field for 150 meters. Then, he broke away from crossed the forest line, crashed into a tree, flew over another 650 meters and rolled across the field again, collapsing while moving. His right strut gave way, the right wing and engine came off. Then he crossed a dirt road and the ditch. At that moment the front left landing gear and part of the left wing came off. Finally, the physio stopped 1,500 meters from the place of the first touch, fell apart into 3 parts and caught fire. The crew managed to evacuate almost all the passengers, but the 7-year-old girl's legs were pinched by the chairs. The crew couldn't get her out and had to leave the burning plane. The girl's mother tried to free her until the last moment and died with her in the fire. 2 more passengers were also killed. 27 people were injured of varying severity. The rest were not injured. The commission was investigating the causes of the disaster. Ministry of Civil Aviation of the USSR. The investigators had to find out why 3 engines failed during the flight and then landed on the terrain. But already when listening to the voice recorder, the investigators grabbed their heads and quickly found out the reason for what happened. She was terribly ridiculous. The fact is that flight engineer instructor Chernyakov decided to check the attentiveness of flight engineer Potapov and turned off the automatic transfer of jet fuel to the consumable tank. Flight engineer Potapov did not notice this, and flight engineer instructor Chernyakov introduced active conversations with the pilots and forgot about it. The fuel tank on the Tu-154B was used for all 3 engines. This was a design flaw, since in the absence of fuel in it, and not GLOFLI.I in the end, the court sentenced the flight engineer instructor Chernyakova is sentenced to 3 years in prison for criminal negligence, but later he was pardoned and released early on amnesty. And Commander Fedorov was fired from Aeroflot. But well, friends, this incident makes hair stand out. Recently, I covered an incident where the pilots fought for their lives to the last when they had a failure of equipment, and thanks to their composure and well-coordinated work, they made safe landings on the ground. And again, we fought for the life of every person. But in this incident we see complete sloppiness. During the flight, the crew had extraneous conversations in the cockpit with the inspector. The commander on this flight flew for the first time as a crew commander. The inspector decided to check the onboard engineer and turned off the automatic fuel transfer to the fuel tank. The fuel system of the Tu-154B aircraft has significant design flaws and has one fuel tank containing 3,300 kilograms of fuel, from which all 3 engines are powered. There are no other highways that would provide power to the engines. Mine fuel tank. A single failure in the fuel system. Fuel leaving the fuel tank can disable all 3 the engine, even if there is a reserve of fuel in other tanks. After that, as the inspector turned off the automatic fuel transfer to the fuel tank, he continued to talk with the pilots and forgot that he had committed a real crime, and the full-time flight engineer, apparently, did not control the device at all. But after that everything began. The engine stalled and no one could understand anything, and then all attempts to restart were unsuccessful. It is understandable. We landed wherever we could, and the landing was very unsuccessful and tough, but what shocked me the most was the evacuation. A 7-year-old girl had her leg pinched and couldn't get out. At that time, the plane was already on fire and the crew, healthy men, did not fight for the girl's life and simply left the plane. The girl's mother stayed with him until the end. It is a very sad end to this story, and it is very sad that people who are entrusted with a huge responsibility are simply not able to justify it. Friends, share your thoughts in the comments. See you soon.